Chapter
Sunny
37.
was slowly growing fond
Getting
of
to know
having
each other.
conversations in the dark. Without the burden of light, people were more relaxed and honest. It reminded him of the frequent blackouts that used to sweep through the city when he was a little kid. His family had no choice but to huddle together and spend a few hours doing nothing but talking to each other. Now, these dark hours had become some of his most precious memories. He was silent for a few moments and then said, "Since we're going to be depending on each other, should we share what abilities and memories we have at our disposal?" This was a logical suggestion. If they were going to fight side by side, knowing each other's strengths was more or less vital. Still, he noticed Nephi's glancing in his direction with a guarded look on her face. Luckily, he was obscured by darkness. "I'll start," Sunny said, both to show his sincerity and to reveal information about himself in a controlled manner. If he took the initiative to talk, he still had to tell the truth, but how much and to what extent was still for him to decide. If they were to ask and he had to answer, however, things would become unpredictable. "My attributes give me an affinity to shadows. I also have a slight affiliation to divinity. Lastly, I am prone to finding myself in unlikely situations." Cassie listened carefully, and then lowered her head, as though embarrassed. He is telling the truth. Not that we doubted your honesty." Why not? I spent so much time earning the reputation of a pathological liar." Sunny cleared his throat and smiled, hiding his nervousness. "Really? That's good to know. But why are you so sure that I am being honest?" The blind girl shifted a little. "Oh, that's my ability. I can see people's attributes. Sometimes I also receive visions. They can be about the future or the past. I mean, that's what I think. It only happened a couple of times." Sunny swallowed, but then relaxed. "So, she is an oracle of sorts." "Luckily, her insight is limited to attributes, otherwise, I'd be in real trouble. Still, I'll have to be careful around her." He finally realized how the blind girl had known about his birthday. The question was whether she had seen it in a vision of the future or in a vision of the past. If it was the former, was it safe to assume that he would certainly be able to celebrate at least one more birthday? Or did knowing the future actually affected and changed it? For example, after learning that he was definitely going to survive, Sunny might have naturally relaxed and lowered his guard. Then, he would die as the result of it. It surely seemed possible, right? That's assuming that the future could be changed. But maybe it wasn't? Then, feeling his head hurting, Sunny decided to avoid this line of thought for now. Instead, he hid his inner turmoil and said in a friendly tone, "That's a good ability. Speaking of abilities, you have already seen mine. My shadow can move independently and explore. It can't affect the material world, but we share sight and hearing. That way, I can spot danger before encountering it. The shadow is fast and stealthy. It can go anywhere and is almost impossible to notice. Oh, I can also see in the dark." He smiled, expecting the girls to understand and appreciate the utility of his shadow scout. Their reaction, however, was a bit strange. Nephi slowly turned her head in his direction, while Cassie became a bit pale and raised her hands to cover her chest. What?" Nephi frowned and said in a flat tone, "Have you ever used your ability in the academy?" Sunny blinked. What a strange question. "In the academy? Sure, of course. Why? Oh, right, they think that I'm a pervert. Crap. Before the girls could say anything, he hurriedly raised his hand and blurted. But I have never used it to do anything improper. You have to believe me. Fortunately, it was the honest truth. However, both Nephi's and Cassie looked skeptical. Sonny gritted his teeth. I had more important things to do than whatever you're thinking about. I spent almost every waking hour learning how to survive. Nephi's raised an eyebrow. I haven't seen you in class, even once. Sonny chuckled. Of course you didn't. While you were busy wiping the floor with other sleepers, I was studying wilderness survival. It was Changing Star's turn to blink. Wilderness, what? There is such a course? Cassie seemed equally puzzled. Yes, there is. It might seem like an afterthought for most people. But for an outskirts kid like me, who never went to a fancy school or saw a private tutor, learning how to survive in the wilderness is the difference between life and death. Without it, I would have drowned the moment we were sent to the dream realm. On a rare occasion, Nephi's looked completely bewildered. She rubbed her wrists and stared thoughtfully in his direction. I see. I didn't know. Sonny grimaced and struggled to keep the venom from sipping into his voice. When he finally spoke, his tone was light and amiable. That's okay. It's natural for someone of your status not to know. When he mentioned her status, a strange smile appeared on the Changing Star's face. But in the end, she didn't reply. Sonny continued. Anyway, that's my ability. As for memories, I have 3. One is an armor, one is a sword, and the last one is a really loud bell. Now it was their turn to share. After a short pause, Nephi spoke. My attributes give me an affinity to light and fire, as well as a strong affiliation to divinity. I have 2 memories, a rope. While she was speaking, Sonny was looking at Cassie, trying to read her expression. From what he saw, Nephi's was telling the truth. But also, not the whole truth. And judging by how hard the blind girl was trying to hide her true feelings, the secret hiding among Changing Star's attributes was not at all trivial. Interesting. And the sword? The rope is very sturdy and can change its length. The sword is very sharp and can protect its wielder against souls' attacks, to a certain extent. My ability can be used to heal. Sonny didn't miss the wording of the last part. Can be used to heal. Does this mean that its main purpose was something else? He was pretty sure that Nephi's would not reveal all of her cards, just like him. However, healing abilities were extremely rare. Having one that could heal, but was not limited to healing, that would be simply unheard of. But then again, she was Changing Star. One of the few people in history to receive a true name in the first nightmare. If Sonny were to consider his own aspect ability, nothing seemed impossible. I wonder what her aspect rank is. Outwardly, he pretended to be excited. You're a healer? That's great. Having a healer among us is incredible luck. Cassie nodded and smiled. Neff is also an amazing fighter. You should have seen her dealing with those scavengers. Well, I also did not actually see it. But it sounded very scary. Sonny didn't need anyone to tell him how formidable of a warrior Nephi's was. He had seen it with his own 2 eyes. Sort of. Actually, they were his shadow's eyes. Well, whatever it had instead of eyes. Meanwhile, Cassie sighed. It's my turn? My attributes are nothing special. I guess I have an affinity to revelations and fate. My ability is like I told you before. It's not very useful. About my memories, I have three: the bottle, the wooden staff, and this armor. You already know about the bottle. The staff can create wind. The armor is actually of the awakened rank. Neff gave it to me when we met. It has a very powerful protective charm. So, she's not only carrying Cassie on her back, she even gave away her only clothes? An awakened rank armor, at that? What is Nephi's thinking about? The blind girl turned away and added after a while. I used to be a pretty decent fencer, before. Now I can't really fight. The last two sentences were obviously related to her flaw. Sunny and Nephi's, however, both chose to keep their secret. Despite the fact that knowing your companion's flaw was also important for cooperation and having each other's backs. Sharing something like that demanded a very high level of trust. Right now, there was no trust between them. And even if there was, Sunny did not plan to ever share his flaw with anyone. Nephi's, too, seemed to have a lot of secrets. After a while, he said, Good. That's good. I think we have enough tools to survive, provided we use them right. I guess it's time to sleep? In the darkness, Nephi's tilted her head, listening to his words with a distant look. All right. I'll take watch first. Sunny decided to be helpful and said, Actually, my shadow doesn't sleep. It can wake us up if something happens. Changing Star slowly smiled. I'll take watch first. Feeling a bit of coldness in her voice, Sunny sighed and shrugged. Suit yourself? What are you going to watch, huh? You can't even see anything. Whatever. Just don't blame me when something giant swallows us in the middle of the night. Then he suddenly shuddered. Wait, that was not a death flag, right? Right, of course not. No way. Chapter 38 Questions in the Dark. Sleep was avoiding Sunny. For a while, he sat silently in the darkness, listening to the calming rumbling of the waves. In this rare moment of respite, memories of the past few days came flooding into his mind. However, he was too tired to seriously think about anything. He was warm, full, and relatively safe. For now, that was more than enough. Soon, the rhythm of Cash's breathing changed, indicating that she fell asleep. Nephi's was guarding the camp, motionless and, as always, a bit distant. With her silver hair and fair skin, she looked like an alabaster statue. Sunny sighed. He struggled for a bit, and then said quietly, Hey, can I ask you a question? Nephi's glanced at him and shrugged. The lack of an audible response clearly indicated that she remembered about his ability to see in the dark. Sure. Would it be too personal? Sunny hesitated. I thought you legacies come into the spell with a whole inherited arsenal of memories. I mean, that's supposed to be your main advantage. How come you only had 3? Nephi's was silent for a few moments. Actually, I only had 2. The rope came from Cassie. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, I see. Realizing that her answer wasn't really an answer, Nephi's thought for a while and added, We lost most of our memories when my father passed away. The ones that remained were sold one by one over the years, to keep the family afloat. This sword and armor came from my first nightmare. So that's how it was. Sunny realized that the fall of the Immortal Flame clan might have been more thorough than he had thought. Still, something about it didn't make sense. Surely, with your clan's reputation and standing, there were other ways to make money. Without any strong reaction, Nephi simply said, "There were other reasons." Then, she unexpectedly turned her head in his direction. "Can I ask you a question in return?" Sunny swallowed. "Yeah, go ahead." Nephi's tilted her head. "How did you know that I'm a legacy?" "What?" "That's it." "Simple. I heard Castor mention it. He was scolding other sleepers to make them treat you with respect." She gave him a nod and turned away. What thoughts were hidden behind her calm gray eyes, Sunny did not know. Some time had passed before he gathered enough courage to ask the question that he really wanted to ask. Before doing it, though, he made sure that Cassie was sound asleep and lowered his voice. "Can I ask another question?" Without getting a negative response, he continued. "Why are you burdening yourself with her?" A corner of Changing Star's mouth curled up slightly. "Why? Wouldn't you?" Sunny gritted his teeth, feeling the flaw pushing the truthful answer out of his mouth. No. To be honest, he wanted to believe to the last moment that the answer would be yes. But one of the things he had lost after the nightmare was the ability to lie to himself. Truth was merciless. It's not that Sunny did not pity the blind girl or didn't want to help her. It's just that he knew with certainty that it was simply not something he could do. He was barely able to save himself, let alone carry a helpless person across the dream realm. If he tried, they would just die together. Still, he couldn't help but be a little disappointed in himself. Nephi's, however, did not seem to judge him. She showed no reaction at all. After a few moments, she simply said, "Because I want to." Because she wants to? That was not the response Sunny expected to hear. He was pretty sure that she would either lecture him about virtue and compassion or disclose some obscure way to make Cassie's seemingly weak ability incredibly useful. However, she did neither. Nephi's expected him to believe that she was putting her life in danger, to the point of sacrificing an awakened armor-type memory, because that was something she simply wanted to do. Ridiculous. At first, he dismissed her response as a non-answer. But the more he thought about it, the more disturbed he felt. Because maybe it was actually the truth. Due to the circumstances of his life, Sunny had never really done things because he wanted to. Most of the time, he was doing them because he needed to. It was never a question of want, it was always a question of must. For him, this was a basic rule of life. But was it really? Or was it just a matter of perspective? Nephi's had certain advantages in her upbringing, but they weren't as ample as he had imagined. She had no wealth and no arsenal of relics to empower her. However, she did have a mentality that was different from Sunny's. It wasn't impossible for her to have the audacity to disregard need in favor of something as frivolous as desire, and do things that a normal person like Sunny would never do. Like helping a blind girl simply because that was what Nephi's wanted to do. Perhaps, that mentality was the greatest advantage of all. Perhaps, that was the real barrier that separated legacies from the rest of them. That was a lot to think about. However, before Sonny could gather his thoughts, Nephi suddenly spoke again. My turn. Does she mean it's her turn to ask a question? Indeed, that was what she meant. Changing Star once again turned to Sonny and, after a long pause, suddenly asked, Do you know the legend of Odysseus? A what? Who? What sort of a weird question is that? Bewildered, Sonny shook his head. Then, remembering that she couldn't see him, he said, No. Nephi sighed and turned away. A few moments later, she softly said, Odysseus was a hero in an ancient war. In the legends, some humans back then had powers akin to the awakened. Achilles with an aspect of indestructible body. Diomedes that was so ferocious even the god of war was wary of him, Ajax who was as strong as a giant. Odysseus was not the strongest, and not the bravest. However, he was the most cunning. Sonny blinked, staring at the silver-haired girl. What? Where did this come from? Why is she suddenly so eloquent? Meanwhile, Nephi's continued. In the end, Odysseus's cunning ended the war, and he prepared to sail home. However, the gods cursed him to endlessly wander the seas, never to return. Over the years, he survived one horror after another and lost all of his companions. Then, shipwrecked, he found himself on an island where the beautiful fairy, Calypso, lived. Changing Star's ethereal, strangely wistful voice resounded in the darkness, creating an enthralling atmosphere. Sonny couldn't help but listen with the utmost attention. Calypso fell in love with Odysseus and invited him to her palace. For many years, they lived together in harmony. The island was like a paradise, filled with all kinds of wonders, delicacies, and delights. As long as loving Calypso was by his side, Odysseus was even immortal. But the longer he stayed, the more time he spent sitting on the shore, looking at the sea with bleak eyes. Nephi smiled. In the end, Odysseus built a makeshift boat and abandoned the island, leaving all its delights, the beautiful fairy, and even his immortality behind. So, my question is, why did he leave? Sonny blinked. What? What kind of a mind game was that? He even considered that Nephi's was mocking him, but it didn't seem to be the case. It looked like she was sincerely interested in the answer. Weirdo. He thought for a bit, and then said without too much conviction. Maybe it was because he was far away from home? A fleeting smile appeared on Nephi's face. Far away from home. All right. After that, she turned away and lowered her head, becoming like a statue again. It seemed like their conversation was over. Grumbling internally, Sonny laid down and tried to fall asleep. However, the image of bleak-eyed Odysseus kept appearing in his mind. After a while, he whispered, Well? Did he make it back home? Soon, Nephi's replied. Yes. He returned to his wife and son, and they lived happily ever after. Satisfied, Sonny smiled and turned on his side. When he was already half asleep, he heard Changing Star's quiet voice once again. This time, it was barely audible and aimless, as though not directed at anyone. Odysseus was the first human to break the will of gods. In the morning, Sonny and Nephi's were the first to get up. While the sun was rising and the sea was retreating, they made a fire and began preparing a simple breakfast. With Cassius still asleep, They did not talk to each other much. It was like the last night's conversation did not happen. However, after some time, they somehow ended up discussing the plan for the next few days. Nephi's had some ideas. With what you told us about scavengers crowding to the west, the logical step would be to start moving east as soon as we can. Of course, north and south are also acceptable, but that won't put as much space between us and the enemy. Sunny nodded, agreeing with that logic. We have explored to the east a little, but not enough to confidently make it to the next high point in a day. That's why the best course of action would be to spend today scouting a path to that group of cliffs over there and move the camp tomorrow. He sighed. Do you have any idea where we are? Would there be a human citadel to the east? Nephi shook her head. I've never heard of a region that fits the characteristics of this place. In any case, we have to move to find out more. We'll either find a citadel, encounter an unconquered gateway, or die. East is as good of a direction as any. Plus, it's the safest, because there's a horde of monsters to the west. At that point, Cassie suddenly sat up straight. Her eyes were wide open, and her face was a little pale. She looked nervous and excited. Nephi's frowned. Cassie? What's the matter? The blind girl turned to them and smiled. A vision. I had a vision. Like a prophetic dream? Sunny thought, trying to come to terms with this new reality of someone being able to see the future. Or the past. Meanwhile, Changing Star stretched her hand, as though prepared to summon her sword. Are we in danger? Cassie energetically shook her head. No, it's not that. People. I saw a castle full of people. She smiled and pointed with her finger. I don't know how far it is, but I'm sure that it's in that direction. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other, not knowing whether to be glad or petrified. Cassie's small, delicate finger was confidently pointing west.